Who knows where we'll go over the deep blue below? Heave ho, raise up the sails, chasing the winds on a new adventure. Testing! 1, 2, 3. It's been a while, but it's your gal, Juliberry. How are we? Welcome. Hi, Sari. Hi, Pepper. Hi, MT Geek and Geneva and Nelly Game Huntress. Look how purple my room is right now. Welcome to a very special reading that we have planned for this afternoon. It's a long one, but I very much so hold it very near and dear to my heart because this was my Christmas present from our very own Daniartonline, and I'm going to be reading it to you. Throwback to when we debated whether she should post on AO3 or not. It is online. It is on the things because I can go boop and then it's there. I need to remove this song from my playlist. Sorry, hold on. I'm gonna do that right now. Anyways, how are we? How are we? Welcome. I've missed you guys. What have you been up to? Anything crazy? Ooh, I'm gonna just take that off my playlist. Bye-bye. Hi, Danny. Oh my goodness. I've missed you guys. Hanging with cool people in VC, you wouldn't know them. You're so right. You're so... Oh, so jealous. It's like I was just there. Yo, Sparks! Hey, man. Hey. My brother just got his wisdom teeth removed. I'm finding a lot of joy in it. Throwback to when I got my wisdom teeth removed and all I want to do was watch Iron Man because I'd never seen it and I was really in my Marvel phase at the moment and I really wanted to watch Iron Man. So I ended up watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. instead and I got attached to those characters and then the show kind of got bad. Anywho, I need to update that sub goal because it's way too high. But look how close we are. Hold on, you can't even read who's following. You can hear though. No, you even can't. Hold on. What does this button do? Nope, that's... Oh my god! I broke it, guys. Cancel me. There we go. Follows. We're super close. Yo, first time chatter on Originality. Hello, welcome to the stream. How are you? Okay. I'm so excited to read this fanfic, bro. I'm gonna put the lore music on and it's gonna be fantabulous. Yes, you're good. I'm so glad to hear that. Welcome. All right. Yes, we're super close to our follow goal. And then, yo, Teal! I saw your TikTok. You posted it. Guys, Teal's been cosplaying me. And it's been an absolute slay. Oh, Sparks, thank you for the hydrate. Guys, it's been so staticky in my house. Like, I think I literally so short-circuited my keyboard right before I started stream because I, like, touched my stream deck and it shocked me. And I was like, ooh, ow, I'm just, like, danky for real. And then I went to type on my keyboard and it wouldn't type. So I think I short-circuited my keyboard. But yes, guys, this is going to be a long one, but it's going to be worth it. I have the physical copy because I'm special. Nah. Julie on the MHA grind. No, literally, I finished all 5 seasons within like a span of 3 weeks. And now I'm rewatching it and I'm waiting for season 6 to get all dubbed up so I can watch it. Danny helped me design my first hero Sona. So that's fun. Hopefully we'll get to share that later. But I want to kind of get into this because I got a movie date tonight and I want to get this done and I want to have time to do my homework too because I still haven't finished it. Same here waiting on that dub. Let's go. Hello Violent, welcome. Okay, let's see. I turned off alerts. What did you do with who? I bet they're hot. Yeah, they're the sexiest. Okay, Things are off. Lore's on. Cool. Alright. You know it. Yeah, I know it. Alright. So guys, if you don't know Pinkman is a fan fiction that Daniartonline and I are writing together. It's been a while since it's updated. Don't worry about it. It'll get done eventually. We aren't gonna like leave it undone. It's gonna get done. But for Christmas, Danny wrote me a prequel to the fan fiction. It's called Last Christmas. And I'll read the summary for here. Wait, I'll go through the tabs. Okay, so you know it's kind of the same thing as Pinkman. It's Christmas time, y'all. Merry Christmas. Hope you enjoy this little Christmas spinoff. So guys, it's Christmas time. We're reverting back to December. It's no longer January. Uno reverse. Sleepy Boys. As you can tell from, you know what, I won't go through all the tags because, you know, sometimes it's important to be surprised sometimes. I know what happens. And if you haven't read it, then you're gonna find out what happens. Okay. Last Christmas by Daniartonline. Techno's job has never him a day off. And holidays are no exception. 7 days before New Year's, Blade gets himself wrapped up in a mission to save a young boy who's been abducted like aliens, hoping that he'll be able to save the team before this Christmas becomes his last. And this that's so loud. Calm down, Spotify. Oh my gosh. Are you gonna read the Golden Phoenix next Tuesday? We're thinking. If you're in the Discord, you would have seen I sent in general that we might change the day when we do Tommy Tuesday, because Tuesdays for me and Kit are absolutely hectic. My schedule goes from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. and I just don't know if I'll have time. So we might just change it to Wilbur Wednesday because we got nothing going on then. But so y'all probably get a ping about that later sometime next week. Yeah, this takes place 7 days before the events of Pinkman, and it's for me. Merry Christmas, my beloved. Merry Christmas to you too, guys. Danny loved her Christmas gift. Hold on, I need to go put it on. I gotta have her next to me. Here, wait. Ta-da! Hee-hee! I'm such a nerd. Okie dokie. Let's do it. Christmas Day, 7 days before New Year's. Techno had never had a holiday in all the years he'd been working for the CIA, and this year was no exception. He'd never really kept track of the days, his mind just focusing on the missions he was given, the tasks he had to complete, going from one country to another to another. But all that had changed 2 years ago. Now it was impossible not to know that today was Christmas, and impossible not to think about Philza and Tommy sipping hot cocoa by the mantelpiece at their house back in Hong Kong, curling up on the couch as they probably watched The Amazing Spider-Man for the 19th time, and impossible for Techno not to wish he was there with them. Instead, he was walking through Oslo, his boots crunching over a snowy dirt path as he passed underneath the bowed, glowing arches of the Christmas market in Spikersuppa. Again, I apologize if I pronounce any of these countries incorrectly. I'm not a geologist. No, wait, that's rocks. I'm not a geography person. I'm not a GeoGuessr nerd. He wore a tweed overcoat, hands stuffed inside the pockets, and a plaid scarf around his neck. But for Christmas Day in Norway, it wasn't all that bad. Snow fell down in a light drift, but the streets gave off a warmth of their own, something beautiful and joyous in the air. The sun had just started to set, the festivities of the day quickly coming to a close, but kids were still enjoying it while it lasted, laughing rowdily as they skipped by him, skates swinging from their hands. He could even hear a choir from a nearby cathedral singing carols in the distance. An old woman said something to him as he passed by a booth filled with pine wreaths, but he quickly held up a polite hand to decline. He wasn't here for the Christmas cheer, as warm and inviting as it was. He was here for the mission. Hi, Clover. Welcome to the stream. The wind began to pick up a little just as he headed toward the end of the path, stray strands of pink coming loose from his already messy braid. He looked over his shoulder every few steps, checking his watch as he made his way through the crowd, until eventually he reached the ice rink at the center of the square, his boots coming to a halt as he stepped up beside it. People spun around, guiding each other and helping fallen children to their feet, others gliding around them with ease. He searched the crowd of skaters, his eyes looking for someone specific. When finally his gaze latched onto him, it was a young boy with slightly overgrown chestnut brown hair. Techno remembered from the file that he'd just turned 15 2 days ago. He was only a few months older than Tommy, but it didn't really show. He looked pretty young for his age, especially on the ice, slipping across it like a baby deer trying to stand for the first time. The ambassador's kid, he thought absently, just as another boy came up to help steady him on the ice, hair unusually dyed in black and white. The two of them laughing as they slipped unsteadily over the rink, intertwining hands. Dispatch, I have eyes on Aristeus. Is that how you pronounce that, Danny? Did I do it right? Aristeus. B-boy. It's B-duo, guys! Danny said B-duo is not dead. I think this is the B person. Oh, yeah, Greek god, a minor of rustic rural arts, such as beekeeping. Danny's so smart. He said, murmuring the code word for the kid, his breath fogging the air. The familiar female voice of his anonymous dispatcher quickly replied, her voice filling the tiny headset in his ear with static. Dispatch copy. We're on schedule. Any activity? His eyes immediately traveled upwards, toward the rooftops across the square, checking to make sure no one was there, before turning his gaze to the people standing around the rink. He was searching for any suspicious individuals that could be lurking, anyone that might be there to harm the boy. But there was no one. Just smiling parents and giggling children. The agency could have been wrong about the ambassador's son being a target. The intel might have said otherwise, sure, but Techno knew the CIA followed up on dozens of leads, most of which might end up leading nowhere. Negative. Not seeing anything, he said quietly, already beginning to walk to the left, eyes remaining trained on the boy and his friend. I'm gonna make the rounds. Copy, the dispatcher replied swiftly, before he heard the soft click of the receiver as she tapped out of his intercom. He began to circle the rink, glancing about for anything, or anyone he might be able to pick out of the crowd. But most people remained cheery and loud, calling out to one another in Norwegian. Let's test my Norwegian. Hi, God Jul. Or is it goat? I think that means, like happy holidays. I'm trying to remember all the lore. Every now and then, he'd turn his eyes back to the ambassador's son, making sure he was still safe. He seemed to be enjoying himself, a smile plastered onto his face, the sight of him eerily reminiscent of someone else Techno knew, a blonde with the same wide grin. He had to look away again. No one look at me. Then, on his fourth time around, he finally spotted something. A man lingering nearby, a briefcase in his hands. Techno stopped to stare at him before quickly murmuring into the air. Dispatch. Activity. The reply came almost immediately. Report. A man. Briefcase. Black trench coat. 100 yards from Aristeus. Armed? Not sure, he replied. Gonna try and get closer. Negative, Blade. Stay with Aristeus, the dispatcher's voice warned, but he couldn't help himself. He disobeyed the orders, stuffing his hands in his pockets as he watched. Sorry, my music's like loud in my ears. Is the music loud? Is the music good? Type 1 if the music is good. Slay. Okay, thank you. I don't know why it's like loud for me. I love OBS. Sari, am I pronouncing Tubbo's code name correctly? Danny hasn't said anything. I feel like I'm messing it up. I don't like read a lot of Greek mythology. Like the AS and us's, they always trip me up, bro. I love this fic so much. I wish I could say things correct. Do you know when you like read something and you just like mumble it in your head because you don't know how to say it? That's like me with like everything. Negative, Blade. Stay with Aristeas, the dispatcher's voice warned, but he couldn't help himself. He disobeyed the orders, stuffing his hands in his pockets as he watched the man with the briefcase slowly step closer to the rink. Techno noticed how he was looking around carefully, as if trying to watch over his shoulder, and Techno felt his heart rate increase slightly, adrenaline beginning to kick into overdrive as he found his way behind the man, ready to tackle him to the ground if he had to, his hand already reaching toward the gun at his belt. Then he watched as the man slowly lowered the briefcase to the ground and... "Noelle!" he cried, as a cute girl with pigtails and a pink coat tossed herself into his arms, laughing as he lifted her up and twirled her around, before saying something to her in Norwegian, a grin on his face, and she replied with an equal amount of enthusiasm. Techno blinked for a moment before relaxing his body, stuffing his hands back into the folds of his coat before saying, "Dispatch November on that activity." "Copy," the dispatcher began to reply, but just as she did, Techno heard a cry ring out from the crowd, and suddenly his head was whipping up, eyes frantically searching for the ambassador's son. Then he caught sight of him about 100 yards away, all the way on the other side of the rink, only he wasn't alone. A man stood behind him, one of his arms wrapped around the boy's neck and the other holding the barrel of a gun threateningly to his head as he began to drag him away from the rink. The people around them who'd noticed the assault happening had already begun to flee, scooping up loose children and letting out cries of warning to others nearby. "Oh, you're fucking kidding me," Techno muttered, but he was already pulling his own gun from his belt and walking out onto the ice, boots digging into the rough crevices left from the skates as he shouted, "Everyone clear out!" He wasn't sure if everyone in the vicinity understood him, but their attention was moved toward him all the same. More cries of panic and alarm immediately starting up from the people around the square, parents running onto the ice to snag their kids before sprinting away from the center of the rink. Despite the sudden chaos, Techno didn't take his eyes off the man with the gun, taking note of what he was wearing, a dark overcoat, black suit. He saw that the boy in his grasp was now clinging desperately to the man's arm, trying his best to remain steady on his skates, although his feet were being lifted slightly off the ground. He looked terrified, his eyes wide as he gasped for air, lips already turning blue. 15, Techno thought, the number suddenly beating incessantly around his skull. 15. Dubbo! Dubbo! He started toward them, lifting his gun up as he tried to get a clear aim, but it was impossible to find one through the throng of people now running across his line of sight. Not only that, but he was too far away for the shot to be clean, and he wouldn't risk the boy's life by making some reckless move that could get him killed. 15, 15, 5. His thoughts froze, his gun suddenly hitching downward as a blur of black and white crossed his vision, heading straight for the gunman and the ambassador's son. It was the other kid, the friend that had been skating with the boy before, running in to defend him. Techno felt his blood run cold, a shout starting at the back of his throat. "Kid, fuck!" he swore, boots suddenly digging into the ice as he lunged himself. Oopsie. As he launched himself forward, attempting to close the distance between them and dodging people as he went. It was stupid of the kid to try and help, especially against someone who was armed and who was pointing a gun at it. He lunged himself, Denny. He lunged to eat lunch. Lunched. Woo! Where did I? And who was pointing a gun at his friend's head, but apparently that still hadn't been enough to deter him. There we go. I can read. He was hungry. Broski cut him some slack. Yes, he's gonna go eat some Norwegian cookies or something. Now I'm hungry. Ow. The last thing Techno wanted was 2 dead kids tonight. But he was still so far away, still making his way across the rink, and the boy with dyed hair had already reached the ambassador's son. "Let him go, asshole!" He heard the kid yell. Wow. He heard the kid yell, his voice bouncing against the buildings around the square as he lifted a clenched fist to strike. But the gunman was faster, swinging his pistol through... Sorry, I need to put my phone on Do Not Disturb. But the gunman was faster, swinging his pistol through the air and slamming the kid across the side of his face. His head immediately snapped to the side, his body going limp as he fell onto the ice with a sickening thud, and Techno heard the ambassador's son let out a loose strangled cry. "Run!" the boy shouted, fighting against his kidnapper's grip as he swung his legs, trying to catch his footing on the ground again, tears springing into his eyes as he looked down at his fallen friend on the ground. "Rambo!" But the man had already dragged him to the edge of the road. Techno was still about 20 yards away, still too far for a clean shot, and just as he was making his approach, he watched as the man shoved the kid into the backseat of a black Audi before ducking in after him and snapping the door shut. He reached them just as the car revved, raising his gun helplessly as the tires peeled away from the curb and zipped past him. They sped down the road, quickly turning a corner and out of sight, but he'd already caught the plates. His breath stained the air with fog as he reached up to his earpiece, where he hoped his angel was still listening from high above. "Juliet Delta 58542. I've lost eyes on Aristeas." I know something you don't. Guys, it's angel duo time. Hold on. What the muffin? Ah, shoot. Hold on. Okay. I'll text my friend later. Yeah. Danny knows. We know. "Do you know where he is right now?" Tommy asked. Philza slowly tore his eyes away from the book he was reading, some thick Dutch novel Kristen had bought him as a gift, before looking at him over his mug of hot chocolate. They were sitting on the couch in their living room, the second Amazing Spider-Man movie just starting on the TV. The Christmas tree still lit up in the corner, presents now unwrapped beneath its boughs. Tommy was cuddled up in a warm blanket Kristen had brought in from his bedroom, and from what he could hear, she was now cleaning up the dishes from dinner in the kitchen. 10 out of 10 definitely listening to Julie while driving. Oh, well, keep your eyes on the road. Don't be like me and read fanfiction while driving. Yes, it has happened. Don't do it. Phil blinked at him for a moment before glancing down at the Spider-Man card Tommy was holding, watching as his nephew carefully ran his finger along the edge of the fold. "Who?" he finally asked. Oh, wait, it's teasing. "Who?" he finally asked, voice teasing as he pretended to be oblivious. Tommy let out a soft groan. "Ugh, you know who," he said, closing the card again before reopening it, as if Blade's signature would magically appear if he checked it enough times. Oh, Phil said in a mock realization, lowering his hot cocoa onto the coffee table in front of them. "You mean Blade?" "Har har," Tommy drawled, falling back into the cushion and staring up at the TV just as Andrew Garfield swung across the screen, fully decked out in his spider suit. Phil let out a soft chuckle of amusement. No, he chided. "I think he's cute that you asked. Very sweet of you." "Oh, fuck off," Tommy snapped with a smile, grabbing a nearby throw pillow and chucking it toward his uncle's face. Phil reached up and caught it with ease, his laughter warming Tommy's insides blissfully before he finally let out a tiny sigh and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I don't know where he is." "You don't even have a guess?" Tommy asked insistently, looking at his uncle with pleading eyes. Phil only shrugged. "New York? Uruguay? I don't even know how to say that. Kazakhstan? I don't know countries, man." "Beats me, Tommy." He let out another sigh. "I don't work for the CIA anymore, and they don't tell me shit. Even..." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes glancing toward Tommy cautiously before finishing. Even Blade. Tommy frowned, turning his gaze back toward the card in his hands and folding it open again. At this rate, it would probably be split down the middle by morning. I wish he was here, he murmured quietly. There was a long silence, filled only by the sound of the TV and the distant splashes of running water from the kitchen. He could hear Kristen humming something too. No doubt a Christmas tune, before Tommy finally heard Phil reply in a soft voice. I know, kiddo. I do too. Guys, you should be listening to the song Last Christmas by Wham right now. I would, but I want to keep my channel alive and not get DMCA'd. Tommy glanced over at him, seeing Phil's gaze focused on the steam rising from his mug of hot chocolate. His expression suddenly wary and downcast, and for a second, Tommy barely recognized him at all. Then his appearance was shifted back into something more playful, a grin falling back on his lips as he picked the mug back up in his hands and leaned back into the couch again. His book settling onto his lap as he quipped, "Good thing he isn't, though. He'd probably spoil you." Tommy let out a disbelieving scoff, rolling his eyes as he muttered, "Yeah, right." "He wouldn't," someone suddenly scolded from behind them, "because that's my job." And both Phil and Tommy turned to see Kristen walking over to them, wiping her hands off on a hand towel before placing it down on a nearby table. Then she bent down over Tommy, wrapping her arms around his shoulders before planting a gentle kiss on top of his head. "Don't you dare," Phil ordered, lifting a warning finger over toward her, a playful glint in his eyes. "You already got him too many presents as it is." "Nonsense," Kristen replied, ruffling Tommy's curls affectionately. "He's a kid. He deserves to be spoiled every now and then." "She's got a point," Tommy said with a sly smirk, raising an eyebrow at Phil. His uncle shook his head with a scoff, but didn't say much else as Kristen rounded the couch and took her place in between them, reaching forward and into the bowl of popcorn as she settled onto the sofa and glanced up at the TV screen. "Oh, this one?" she asked, pulling at the edge of Tommy's blanket, to which he offered more of as she curled up beside him. "But it's so sad." "That's what I told him," Phil muttered, burying his nose back into his book and taking another sip of cocoa. "Maybe Phil can comfort you when you cry then," Tommy snarked, to which Phil immediately choked on his drink, steam practically coming out of his ears as Kristen burst into laughter, watching humorously as the man next to her dissolved into coughs and sputters, his face now heating up as his eyes watered slightly. Tommy smirked, leaning forward to grab his own cup of hot chocolate as Kristen attempted to ask Phil if he was all right through her fit of laughter. Finally, after a few more moments, Phil recovered enough to carefully lower his drink back onto the coffee table, sitting back in his seat and pointing an accusatory finger at Tommy. "That was not funny," he grumbled. Tommy lifted an eyebrow, a smirk crossing his lip. "Yes, it was," he replied simply, sinking back into the sofa before thinking to himself, "Blade would have thought so too." "Good night. I can't." He misses him. He misses him so much. Oh my goodness. Emotion check? Do we want an emotion check? How we doing? I'm loving this fic so much, bro. This fic owns my soul, kinda. For realsies. Okay. Sorry, it's fixing Spotify again. Alright. Let's get back to Technoblade. Techno stuffed his gun back into his belt as he turned away from where the car had taken off, murmuring into the twilight cold. "Did you catch that plate number?" "Copy," he heard his dispatcher reply, although he could hear a new tension in her voice. "Running it now, Blade." At that, Techno felt a bit of the pressure ease from his chest. If anyone could find the kid now, he knew it would be his dispatcher. Then he turned back to the... Oh my god, excuse me. That just came out of nowhere. Excuse me, let me try that again. I was late, I'm so lost. This is a prequel to Pinkman. This is a prequel to Pinkman. This is a 7 days before Pinkman starts. Like, the present time. Tubbo got kidnapped. Rambu got knocked unconscious. Techno's in Norway trying to protect Tubbo. And then Phil, Kristen, and Tommy are celebrating Christmas together. Last Christmas, I gave you my heart. At that, Techno felt a bit of the pressure ease from his chest. If anyone could find the kid now, he knew it would be his dispatcher. Then he turned back to the now cleared out ice rink, and his eyes landed on the black and white lump still laying sideways on the ice. The boy who tried to save his friend. Techno felt his heart suddenly dip in his chest, and before he could think about it twice, he was moving back across the square, boots sliding over the snow as he reached the boy's side and kneeled down next to him. The cold sting of ice bit through where his trousers met the ground, but he ignored it as he reached out a timid hand to the boy's neck, gently laying his fingers over his skin as he felt for a pulse. It was there, steady and strong, and let out a tiny sigh of relief before retracting his fingers, this time laying them on the boy's shoulder as he shook him awake. "Hey, kid," he said firmly. "Hey, you're gonna have to wake up for me, all right? You can't be falling asleep after a hit like that." The boy stirred slightly, eyes opening a crack before a groan suddenly escaped him, and Techno watched as he rolled over onto his back, hair falling out of his face to reveal a purpling bruise starting over the temple of his left eye, a few minor scrapes bleeding along with it. Techno cringed slightly, immediately citing what parts of the gun had hit the kid's face where. But at least the gunman hadn't decided to shoot him. If anything, he'd gotten lucky. What? The boy's breath hitched, his eyes fluttering open slightly. What the fuck happened? You got hit in the face, Techno stated, leaning back on his heels slightly before adding, like an idiot. You ever heard the phrase, don't run into battle? Next time, try taking it to, whoa, take it easy, he suddenly exclaimed, reaching out a steady set of hands as the boy attempted to push himself into a sitting position, almost tipping back over and plowing his face into the ice for a second time. Did you get him? The kid asked dizzily, his eyes somewhat unfocused, and Techno winced, the sign of a concussion clear as day. Dispatch, please tell me I'm getting emergency responders, he said softly, a hand still resting on the kid's shoulders. On their way, came the voice through his earpiece. Who are you talking to? The boy asked quietly, words slurring together slightly. Don't worry about that, okay? Techno chided, unzipping his jacket slightly so he could reach into his breast pocket. What's your name? He asked softly, pulling out a small pocket-sized flashlight and flicking it once against the fabric of his coat before looking back up at the boy across from him. The dyed-haired kid was giving him a petulant frown, eyeing both Techno and the flashlight suspiciously. Ran, he said finally, then Rambu. That's an interesting name, Techno murmured, lifting the flashlight into the boy's face. The kid immediately closed his eyes, turning away from the brightness, and Techno quickly lowered the light to shoot him a warning look. Look, you gotta let me help you or blah. You gonna let me help you or what? He asked. Rambu stared at him for a moment before some of the fog from his gaze suddenly cleared, panic suddenly increasing his features as he asked, Did they take Tubbo? Techno felt his grip tighten around the flashlight in his hands, his jaw clenching slightly at the name. He hadn't bothered to learn it, even though it had been in the file. His eyes had just skipped over it, like most of the information dumped on him whenever he was given a new mission. Selective memory allowed him to act more on his instinct rather than on information, but maybe he should have paid more attention this time around. Don't worry about... why do I keep wanting to put words in front of words that don't exist? I apologize. Worry about yourself, kid, Techno finally murmured, before raising the flashlight slightly in his hands. Can I do this now? Rambu looked down at it, his eyes glossing over again before he nodded compliantly. And Techno raised the flashlight to his eyes, moving from the outer edge inward. He watched carefully, studying the boy's pupils before letting out a little sigh, turning off the flashlight and stuffing it back in his jacket pocket. Definitely a concussion, he murmured, before casting Rambu a sidelong glance. You ever have a concussion before, kid? Rambu frowned again. No, he stated simply. Well, they're a bitch, Techno said matter-of-factly, just as he heard the sound of sirens from behind him, and turned to see a string of yellow emergency vehicles rounding the street corner, blue lights flashing blindingly against the golden glow of Spikersupa. I don't know Norwegian. You'll have to take it easy for a while, he continued, looking back at Rambu and lifting an eyebrow. Do you think you can stand? The kid didn't bother to give an answer, just started pushing himself off the ground, and Techno stood along with him, hands hovering cautiously nearby. For a second, it seemed like the kid would be steady on his own, standing up and brushing flakes off of his black trench coat. But when he finally pulled his head up to look at Techno again, he immediately swayed, eyes rolling up into the back of his head as he let out a soft moan, his knees buckling beneath him. He pitched forward, and Techno quickly reached out to catch him, wrapping one arm around his shoulder and another around his knees before hefting the boy into his arms. He was definitely tall for his age, but he wasn't all that heavy, and Techno made sure the boy's lolling head was tucked neatly into his shoulder. Sorry, my stomach just totally flipped right there. So as not to cause any more strain on his head injury, before heading toward the emergency vehicles pulled up along the side of the road. Don't worry, kid. I got you, he murmured softly, but I need you to stay with me, okay? When he didn't get a response right away, he cast a glance down at the kid now settled in his arms. Snow dotted his hair and eyelashes, the side of his face that was still scraped and bruised standing out in brutal contrast to his pale skin. But what Techno noticed in the most was the boy's fluttering eyelids and his short, shallow breaths, as if it was taking everything in him not to pass out. Techno suddenly felt a jolt of panic shoot through him, the distant memory of a blond boy flashing across the forefront of his mind, face constricted in pain and a hand grabbing for his chest. Oh, my stomach flipped again! I love this story so much. He glanced back up at the ambulances, the paramedics already pushing open the back doors of one of the vehicles for them, but Techno quickened his pace anyways. You're gonna save him, right? Techno's voice. Rambu! Wow! Do I need to take my medication? I don't know. Rambu's... My brain is like going faster than my words. I think that's what's happening here. Whoops. What the muffin do you want from me? Take my watch off. Sorry. Rambu's voice had come out in a daze, his words all mumbled together, but Techno had still heard him, his gaze immediately drawn back to the kid in his arms. The boy wasn't looking at him, his head still bent into the crook of Techno's shoulder, unmarked cheek flush with the fabric of his tweed coat. His eyes were still heavy-lidded, with the pull of unconsciousness, and Techno felt his grip suddenly tighten around him. If he had just been there, if he had just kept his eyes on the kid, none of this would have happened. The ambassador's son would still be here, and the two boys would still be skating, or drinking hot cocoa, or whatever the fuck else kids did on Christmas Day. 15. Fuck. Techno pulled his eyes away from the boy in his arms, determination suddenly creasing the lines of his face. I'm gonna save him, he finally replied, resolve etched into every syllable of his voice just as the paramedics reached them. Then, as Techno gently lowered the boy onto the ambulance's gurney, he whispered, Don't worry, kid. I'll bring him back for you. Oh! I love me some peer pressure duo. On a very rare occasion. I really enjoy their dynamic. Now we're back to Angel Duo. Guys, get hype. Get hype. I hope you are all finding this relaxing. Low blow pepper. Don't crash again. Oh my gosh. Teal. You absolute mad lad. Y'all both mad lads for real. Okay. He's asleep. Philza pulled his eyes away from the TV screen to glance over at Kristen, who had spoken, and then at Tommy, who had curled into himself beside her. His eyes closed. His chest rose and fell steadily, his blonde curls framing his face, and Philza felt a smile tug at his lips. Tommy always looked so peaceful when he was asleep, so much more like the child he was supposed to be, and it made Philza's heart ache with so much love that it hurt. He'd never known he could love anyone as much as he loved Tommy, that he could care about anyone so much that losing them would break him so completely. He didn't know it was possible to feel so full and yet so empty at the same time, and still, he wouldn't trade it for anything. The movie was on its last legs. Andrew Garfield finally facing off against the Rhino on a New York City block. The credits just about to roll, but it was late, and it had been a long day, especially for Tommy, who'd normally sleep in late and take regular naps, but still somehow managed to crawl out of bed at 7 in the morning, so no one could really blame him for dozing off mid-movie. He'd seen it 1,000 times anyway. Filza had put down his book as soon as the Times Square fight had started happening, and Kristen's eyes had been glued to the screen since she'd first sat down. But as the boys slept on the couch beside them, they both stared at him, fond smiles on their faces, the smell of peppermint and chocolate still drifting in the air. "Then I guess we better get him to bed," Filza murmured at last, slowly standing up and letting out a grunt as his joints ached and stretched. "You do that. I'll clean up in here," Kristen replied quietly, already starting to pull the remote toward her and raising it to click off the TV. Filza rounded the coffee table so he was at Tommy's side before leaning over him, gently sliding his arms underneath the boy's form before lifting him up, still swaddled in his blanket, and started toward his bedroom. He'd definitely grown since the last time Filza had done this, more than a couple inches on top. He was getting tall, but the old man still managed to carry his nephew down the hallway and into his bedroom on his tiptoes. The whole house had been decorated for the holiday, and Tommy's room was no exception. He'd always insisted on stringing up Christmas lights around his bedroom every year, and as Filza towed the door open and stepped inside, they sparkled colorfully, washing the room in a warm, iridescent glow. It was only when he gently placed Tommy down on his bed that the boy finally stirred, breath hitching slightly in his chest as he settled onto the sheets, one curious eye cracking open to look at his uncle. "Hey, mate," Filza whispered, kneeling down on the carpet beside him. So they were eye to eye, and gently brushing a loose strand of Tommy's hair out of his eyes. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "It's okay," Tommy murmured, eyes closing again before whispering, "Did I miss the end?" Filza let out a soft laugh. "You did. Just a little," he said, holding up his fingers so they were only millimeters apart. "But we can watch more tomorrow if you like, alright?" "Okay," Tommy sighed, nestling his head further into his pillow, before reaching out a sleepy hand toward his uncle. "Sorry I passed out on you." Phil smiled, taking Tommy's fingers in his and whispering, "All good, kiddo," before placing a gentle kiss on top of his knuckles. "Just get some rest, okay?" "Okay," Tommy murmured again, his grip loosening from his uncle's hand. Phil stood, about to start heading out of the room, but he couldn't help but stand there for a second more as Tommy's breathing evened out again, the sound soft and comforting and oh so childlike. He could feel himself getting emotional as he looked down at his nephew, wondering to himself how he'd gotten so lucky, before finally leaning down to plant a kiss on Tommy's forehead and whispered, "Sweet dreams, Tom." Then finally he straightened and headed out of the room. He brushed moisture from his eyes as he closed the door behind him, taking a deep breath as he stood there for a moment, steadying himself. He'd give just about anything for a second longer with Tommy, but he knew the kid needed his rest more than Filza needed his company, so he headed back down the hall, where he heard Kristen moving around in the kitchen again. When he spotted her, she was humming to herself, the soft notes of Wham spinning off the record player in the living room. She had tied her hair back and was busy wrapping up the leftover pastries from dinner, placing cookies neatly into Tupperware boxes and plastic wrap over the apple pie. He stopped in his tracks when he saw her, some of the breath getting knocked out of his lungs as he watched her spin around and place the pie on the island counter. He'd known her for a long time, longer than she'd been taking care of Tommy, since their late 20s, but she was still as beautiful as the day he met her, and he still had the biggest crush. That was when she spotted him, her face breaking into a wide grin. "Hey," she greeted. "You get Tommy to bed all right?" Filza smiled back. He couldn't help it, and walked toward her, leaning his elbows against the countertop as he settled in across from her. "Yeah," he murmured, pulling his eyes back toward Tommy's bedroom door. "He woke up for a minute, but went straight back to sleep right after." "That's good," Kristen said, taking a towel and beginning to give the countertop one last scrub. Then she shot Filza a wicked grin, lifting a suggestive eyebrow. "That means we can stay up late and pop open the wine." He laughed gently. "Are we going to watch something other than Spider-Man now?" he asked. "Oh, yes, please," Kristen groaned, tossing the towel over the rack before turning toward the nearest cabinet and cracking it open, grabbing 2 glasses by their stems and lowering them onto the counter. Then she walked over to the wine rack, glancing it over briefly, before deciding on a bottle, and picking up on the Sauvignon. I don't know my wines. I may be 22, but I still don't know my wines. After pouring out their drinks, they made their way back to the living room where Philza lifted the needle off of the Wham record, and Kristen took a seat on the sofa, cradling her wine glass in hand. She leaned forward to take the remote in her hand again and turned the TV back on. "So, what are we thinking?" she said as she began flicking through the channel guide. Cheesy Hallmark rom-com, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Ooh, they're playing Die Hard. The best Christmas movie! Wait, hold on, Philza said, eyes narrowing slightly as the corner of the screen suddenly caught his attention. He walked closer to the TV, seeing that the news was playing in the tiny window before asking, Could you go to that for a second? Sure, Kristen said, pressing the guide button again to enlarge the channel and turning up the volume a little bit. The big white text on the bottom stating, Breaking News. The newscaster reading off the teleprompter with a concerned expression on her face. In Oslo tonight, bystanders claim there was an incident involving 2 teenage boarding school students in Spikersuppa. Spikersuppa. I don't know how to say it. One of the boys, the British ambassador's son, 15-year-old Tubbo Smith, was abducted at gunpoint and led into a vehicle nearby. The other boy, whose identity is being withheld from the public, is currently recovering at a local hospital from minor injuries. Local authorities say that they are taking control of the investigation, but will keep you updated as the situation continues to develop. I could be a news anchor. I can read off of a monitor. I'm doing it right now. Phil's attention shifted to the picture on the screen. Tubbo Smith in his school uniform, bright blue eyes and a giddy smile on his face. He felt his heart suddenly dip in his chest and slowly sank into the seat beside Kristen, who cast him a sideways glance, eyebrows creasing together in concern. Phil? She asked, her arm coming to rest over his. What is it? What's wrong? For a second, Phil didn't say anything. A memory suddenly surfacing from the back of his consciousness, something he'd forgotten, or at least he thought he had. Cara Puffy, the previous UK agency chief, had thrown herself a retirement party last Christmas, one that Philza had attended, being one of her greatest friends. She'd made a lot of allies during her time in London, and the British ambassador had been no exception. He remembered the ambassador had brought her son with her that night, remembered spotting the 14-year-old flipping through the books in Puffy's office library, remembered him ducking around pillars to keep out of his mother's line of sight, remembered laughing to himself as he watched the boy stuff his plate with honey cakes. But the real reason Phil remembered him was because he reminded him so much of Tommy at the time. Silly, sweet, and always wearing a smile. He remembered thinking the two of them would get along, if they ever had the chance to meet, and Puffy saying something about bringing Tommy to London one day to introduce them to one another. They could have been friends. They would have been. Phil, sweetie, talk to me, Kristen murmured, setting down her wine glass to give him her full attention. You okay? Philza swallowed thickly, his mouth suddenly sandpaper dry, and he slowly pulled his eyes away from the screen to look at her. I've met him, he managed, the words practically strangling him as he spoke. The ambassador's son? Phil nodded. He's a good kid, he muttered, glancing down at his hands. There had to be something he could do. What could he do? But he was retired. He was out. He had his own family to think about, his own child. It wasn't that he hadn't been enjoying his retirement. He loved spending all his time with Tommy and finally being able to bring Kristen on a proper date without having to rush off to work every 5 minutes. But sometimes it felt like he'd lost his purpose. He knew Puffy felt the same way and absently wondered if she'd already heard the news, imagining her stomping around her new apartment in Prague, dialing every phone number she knew to try and provide even the smallest ounce of help, when the truth was there was nothing they could do anymore. They'd both been cut off by the agency, their program shut down, and their badges handed in. They were no good to anyone anymore, not even a missing 15-year-old kid. Bye, Rosie. Have a good time at the aquarium. Peace out, home slice. Mwah. Love you. Thanks for coming in for a bit. 15. I want someone to die for... Whoa! Blueberry just came in and just chose violence today. Why do you want someone to die? Save that for the main story, bestie. Oh my goodness. Go reread chapter, is it chapter 4? Whatever chapter Sam gets killed in. What? Reread that one. 15. Fuck. He muttered under his breath, clenching his hands into fists. He felt so goddamn useless like this. I can't imagine, Kristen murmured, her gaze back on the TV. And on Christmas, too? His mother's gotta be freaking out right now. I know I would be if that was... She trailed off. But Philza quickly peeked up at her, the terrified look in her eyes giving away exactly what the end of that sentence was. If that was Tommy. Our Tommy. And Philza suddenly felt her hand find his, warm fingers lacing around his cold ones as she whispered, "Stuff like this, it always makes you want to hold him closer." It's time to be real. Guys, it's time to be real. Everyone say hi to my be real. Guys, it's be real time. Chapter 3. Oh, it's in chapter 3? Man. I helped co-write the damn fic and I can't even remember. Why do you want more dead people? Why aren't you saying hi to my be real right now, guys? Come on. I taught you better than this. You have a minute left. Yes, thank you, unoriginality. See? They get it. Ba, ba, ba. Oh my goodness. Why am I so tired? I think it's the music. I think the music is making me sleepy, y'all. Oh my goodness. We got one high. Unoriginality is the only person I care about now. That's a cute pic of me. She slay. No, Blueberry. No dead people. Oh my goodness. Ah. Alright. Slay. Why are random men DMing me on Instagram? Go away. Oh my gosh. I can never find peace. I miss Danny. I miss Sari. Where did I leave off? Oh yeah. Wait, let me see what he even wrote. I just saw a giant paragraph and it made me nervous. Oh yeah, it's just a weirdo. I got him. I blocked him. Don't worry. Okay, hold on. Oh my gosh, Sparks! I'm so popular, guys. We right here. You didn't say hi to my B-reel! What do you mean you're right here? So we blocked one guy and then we DM'd the other one. We're cool. We're chilling. Life is well, guys. My Discord account got hacked, so I'm not on the server. Bestie? Make sure you do the TFA thing, the two-factor authorization. Do you need me to like kick you out of the server so you can get back in it? Ba, 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 ba. Yes. Are you wait. Okay, there's two blue teas. Which blueberry tea are you? I thought you had blocked me as the weirdo, lol. No, there was another guy. Why would I... Would you be fair? No! That would be a not nice move of mine. I had 2 DMs. The one with Barry. Okay, cool. Kick. And then... Hold on, wait. I can... Social plugs. Discord. Alright. What the muffin? That didn't work? Hold the phone. My thing broke. Don't panic. At the disco. Oh wait, they disbanded. Too soon? Yeah, too soon. I'm so evil, bro. Okay, Cloudbot turned off. That's so cringe. Alright, gang, take 2. Boop. Yay, I did it. Okay, let's keep going. Let's be angsty. Let's be angsty, broskies. Philza glanced down at their intertwined fingers for a moment before looking over his shoulder, down the hall toward Tommy's bedroom door. Even from this distance, even under the same roof, the longing to be near him was still there, deep and yearning, like a chasm he'd never quite be able to fill. And he'd be lying if he said there weren't times when he thought that chasm would destroy him, when he thought about what it would be like to lose his nephew forever. Throwback to the chapter where he gets kidnapped and Philza finds out. Go read Pinkman! Go read it! It was hard not to smother him sometimes, ever since Philza had started spending so much time in emergency rooms and intensive care units and sitting next to Tommy in a hospital bed, hoping against hope that this wouldn't be the time that he slipped through his fingers. At some point, he'd just learned to always hold him closer, so much so that he almost forgotten there was any other way to hold a child. At arm's length, in another country, with your head buried in your work, all because you'd forgotten that your job, your real job, is to just be there for him. You're right, Philza finally murmured, turning back toward the TV. His mother is probably crazy with worry. There was a pause of silence as the report finally cut to commercial, and Kristen softly whispered, "Do you think they'll find him?" Philza let out a tiny breath. Sorry, whoa. Philza let out a tiny breath, hoping someone out there would hear his silent prayer as he muttered, "I hope so." It's gonna be Blade! It's gonna be Blade! Technoblade. Nikki's fingers flew over her keyboard as she ran the plate number Blade had given her through the Norwegian registration database, simultaneously pulling up CCTV footage from the streets surrounding Spikersuppa. I feel like they're laughing at me every time I pronounce something wrong. I can feel it. I can sense it in my gamer bones. No, that's utterly fine. No! I feel like I'm gonna offend some Norwegian person if they ever find this. I'm gonna offend Norway. Search running Spiker Sub on another monitor as the make and model of the car finally popped up on her screen. Absently, she was listening to Blade's voice through her headset, talking gently with a kid, something about a concussion, before finally finding the footage she was looking for. She glanced over it, clicking through the camera angles as the car turned corners and sped around other vehicles, obviously in a rush. She tracked them, trying to find out where they were headed, and as soon as she caught up to their current location, she pressed down on the receiver and said, "Blade, copy." There was the brief sound of mumbling, something she couldn't quite make out, before she heard the scuff of boots on snow and Blade's voice reply, "Yeah, I'm here." Nikki immediately heard the shift in his tone, his words suddenly coming out icy and cold. She'd been working as his dispatcher long enough to know that voice. He was angry at himself. It was probably her fault. She told him to stay on the kid, and he'd gone off book and trusted his instincts. This wasn't an unusual occurrence between the two of them. The majority of the time, Blade's instinct tended to be right, and she'd be lying if she said she hadn't slipped up on more than one occasion. But in all the time she'd known him, he'd never gotten angry at her, even when it was her fault, even when he'd almost gotten killed because of her. Instead, it was always inward, always toward himself, and Nikki suddenly froze up for a moment, her finger hovering just over the receiver. Then she cautiously glanced around the office, wondering if any harm could come of breaking protocol just this once. But it was noon on Christmas Day in Langley, and the rest of the cubicles were practically empty of agents. "Fuck it," she finally muttered, before pushing down on the receiver and asking in a low voice, "Are you all right, Blade?" There was a long pause, one that told her that he knew she was breaking protocol. That he knew she was breaking about 1,001 rules right now, and she held her breath, waiting for him to say something about it. But when he spoke, he only answered with a quick, "Yeah, I'm fine." So was the kid, and Nikki felt her shoulders relax as his voice shifted back to its usual soft, collected calm, letting out a tiny sigh of relief. Then she heard the same voice quip in a humorous tone, "Don't tell me you were worried about me, Dispatch." She felt her ears immediately heat up, cheeks flushing with embarrassment as she turned back toward the monitor, tracking through CCTV footage, ignoring him completely as she stated, "I found the car." He heard a small huff of laughter on the other end of the headset, as if Blade could hear her flustered state through her voice alone, before he added, "I'm getting in a BMW right now. Can you see me?" "Affirmative," Nikki replied, throwing up another set of traffic cams on her monitor as she watched the pink-haired agent open the door of the red coupe. Coupe? That's a ballet move. A coupe. All right then, Blade said, voice grinning through her headset as the car's lights turned on as he revved the engine. "Lead the way." "It's Tubbo time." Changing the song. This is a good song. Tubbo wasn't really 100% sure on what the hell was going on, but he knew enough. He knew his life was probably in danger, and he knew he should try to remain as compliant as possible in order to keep himself alive. But as he sat in the leather seat of the car, all he could do was stare at his ice skates and think to himself, "I can't run in these." He could try, but he wasn't sure there'd be much point to it. He wouldn't be able to go all that fast. Besides, there was 3 of them, the one abductor who'd grabbed him, and 2 others who sat in the front of the car. And only one him. Well, there had been Rambu too, but tears started at the back of his throat as he thought of his friend being smacked across the face with the barrel of the man's gun. Falling to the ice like a pile of lead, the sound of his body hitting the surface of the rink. He clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms as he tried to keep the tears from spilling over. He couldn't cry. Not now. Not with these men still surrounding him, taking him to God knows where. He wouldn't let them think he was just some weak 15-year-old kid, even if he was. Oh, Tubbo. He could feel the presence of the gun like a weight on his chest, still trained on him from the lap of the man that sat across from him. Whoa. Tubbo cast him a sideways glance, seeing if the man was looking at him, but he was busy exchanging words with the driver, his voice calm and lowered. It wasn't Norwegian, which Tubbo was actually pretty good at, but if he had to guess, he'd probably say they were speaking Russian or some other Slavic language. He looked back at his skates, wondering if it was possible for him to reach down and untie them without the man noticing. If the chance came up for an escape, he needed to be as prepared as possible. He slowly leaned forward, snaking his hand down to his skate and grabbing at the lace, pulling slowly. He held his breath as he did, peeking out of the corner of his eye every couple seconds to look at the gunman. Then, once he undid the tie of the first skate, he let out a little sigh and tried reaching for the next. Unfortunately, he must have moved too fast this time, because the man beside him suddenly snapped, "Aye!" gesturing at Tubbo with a gun. "Gut und!" Tubbo immediately shot backward into his seat, retracting his hands to his lap as the man eyed him suspiciously. Then the gunman slowly returned to his conversation with the driver, and Tubbo let out a shaky breath of relief. He could feel his fingers trembling against his legs, his whole body jumping with fear, his heart pounding in his ears. Run! His instincts were screaming, "Get the fuck out of here!" But he couldn't do anything about it. Pinned to the back of his seat, like by the gleaming metal gun held loftily in the man's hand beside him. He swallowed thickly, fists clenching as the car continued to speed along. Christmas lights whipping past the window beside him. He couldn't stop thinking about the last words he'd exchanged with his mother only hours ago. She'd called him with a smile in her voice, wishing him Merry Christmas before her flight back home took off. He was supposed to be following shortly after, getting on a plane tomorrow to head back to London. He suddenly imagined her waiting for him to get off his plane, and getting increasingly worried as minutes passed and he never exited the terminal. He wondered when she'd find out he was missing. He wondered if she'd ever find him at all. He wondered if he'd already been dead by the time she did. The drive wasn't long, maybe only 10 minutes, before they were suddenly swerving off the main road and down a narrow side street. The car suddenly jolted to a halt, and Tubbo watched as all the men exited the vehicle simultaneously, leaving him in the car by himself. He blinked, sort of surprised that they'd leave him here unsupervised, before reminding himself that they were armed, and he was just some shrimpy kid. He couldn't imagine he posed a particularly daunting threat to them. Then Tubbo slowly watched as another vehicle rolled up alongside them. A large black van, and two men stepped out of it into the dimly lit street, both dressed in the same black uniforms as Tubbo's abductors, telling him they were all working together. 5 of them now, he thought absently, a sick feeling rising in his stomach. 5. A fresh round of panic sparked inside of him, and he suddenly got the terrible feeling that if they put him inside the van, he wouldn't be seeing much of anything ever again. He immediately lurched forward in his seat to finish untying his skates, his breaths coming shorter and shorter as he worked, hands fumbling over the laces. Finally, he managed to get them off, quickly kicking them underneath the car seat in front of him before sitting back up. He could feel himself hyperventilating, his chest aching with panic as he peered out the window beside him cautiously. The 5 men had begun chatting casually to each other, one of them pointing toward Tubbo in the car, and Tubbo felt his heart miss a beat as few of them turned to look at him. Then once they'd lost interest and turned away, he quickly swiveled his head toward the other side of the car, where the gunmen had been sitting across from him, and he caught sight of the stone sidewalk just beyond the car window. It was a pretty narrow exit, so no one was guarding that side of the vehicle, and for a second, Tubbo thought he must have been dreaming. In his short huffs of air becoming dizzying, he quickly shut his eyes, forcing himself to take a slow breath, to get himself to focus on what he could do, weighing the variables carefully in his head. He could probably get out of the car and start making a run for it, but that would only get him so far. The hard part would be getting away. The corner of the street was pretty far, at least 20 yards, and his adversaries were probably faster than he was, not to mention they had guns. And then what? He wasn't exactly sure what it was they wanted, but there was a very real chance they would shoot at him if he tried to escape, and it wasn't like he could outrun them forever. Then again, they'd taken him alive, but for what reason? Were they planning on keeping him forever? And if they were, what would they do with him? Or what would they do to him? Tubbo quickly decided he wasn't going to stick around to find out. He cast one last glance at the 5 men, still chatting just outside, before looking forward the door opposite to him again, the one closest to the sidewalk. There was one last hesitation, one last second where his body froze up. But then Tubbo was pushing through the feeling, forcing himself to slide over to the other side of the car and flick open the automatic lock. Then he yanked the handle forward toward himself and flung the door open, and then he was running. The cold of the icy street bit into his heels as he sprinted, wind stinging his face, when he suddenly heard shouts erupt from behind him, clicking sounds echoing off the walls of the buildings around them as the men released the safety of their weapons. He could practically feel their aim trained on him, anticipating the feeling of bullets in his back as he kept running. Absently, he wondered what it would be like to slowly fall to the ground as he died. The feel of the pavement on his chin, the warmth of his blood melting the snow beneath him. He wondered what words his mother would say at his funeral, or whether Rambu would cry over his casket. He wondered what exactly his best friend would remember about him, wondered if he'd just slip into the same sort of absent, distant solemnness that he had when Tubbo had first met him. He wondered if Rambu would just forget about him altogether. But before any of the men could let out a single shot ring out, a car was suddenly jerking around the same corner that Tubbo was sprinting for, headlights blinding him as the vehicle barreled toward him head-on. And for a second, Tubbo was sure it was going to run him over. He let out an involuntary yelp of surprise, lurching away from the oncoming car and tripping over his heels before falling backward onto the concrete. He immediately squeezed his eyes shut, cringing as he waited for the car to inevitably hit him. But he only heard the screeching sound of brakes echo down the street, followed by the blinding ring of gunshots raining down around him. Tubbo flinched at the sound, curling into himself protectively as he lay on the pavement and ducking his head into the cold cement as he thought, "This is it. I'm going to die. This is gonna be my last Christmas. I gave you my heart, but the very next day you gave it." I'm sorry. Then all at once the gunshots came to a halt, and Tubbo found himself slowly cracking an eye to see that the car had swerved around him, somehow skidding to a halt between him and his abductors to act as some sort of giant metal shield. Like Captain America. Giant metal shield before the driver's side door slowly opened and a person stepped out. Tubbo stared at the man, gawping. Is that a word? The action of the verb gawp. Gawping as a head of pink braided hair whipping toward the other side of the street, swinging a handgun over the roof of the car to level several shots at his abductors. Tubbo was pretty sure he heard someone fall to the ground with a cry, but he couldn't be 100% positive due to the obstruction of the vehicle in his line of sight. Then the man quickly ducked down beside him, releasing the clip of his pistol just as the sound as more shots echoed from over their heads, ringing as the enemy returned fire, shouts of a different language rising up across the street as bullets dinged against the coupe in front of them. If the man with pink hair seemed concerned about this, he didn't show it. Instead, his brow was knit with an intense focus as he reloaded his weapon. His shoulders tensed with apprehension. It was only when the weapon was fully loaded that he reached a hand up to his ear and muttered, "Going dark," before pulling out what appeared to be an earpiece and stuffing it into his pocket. Then he finally cast a glance over at Tubbo and asked, "You okay, kid?" Tubbo just kept staring at him, his brain trying its best to form words, trying to make his jaw move, but everything in his mind suddenly felt hazy and numb. He must have taken too long to think of a reply, because a grimace suddenly crossed the man's face as he yelled, "Listen to me. Your body's going into shock right now, which is totally normal, but I'm still going to need you to talk to me. All right, Tubbo?" At the sound of his name, Tubbo suddenly felt reality slam into him all at once. His vulnerable position on the tarmac, the cold stone biting through his cotton socks, his hands burning from where he'd scraped them against the concrete. It took him another couple of seconds to get his bearings, but finally he managed to stammer out, "Sure," just as the man was rising to his feet again and taking aim over the car. This time he let out 2 consecutive shots before ducking again, bullets ricocheting over their heads as the enemy continued to return fire. "You know, this isn't usually how I like to spend Christmas," the man muttered under his breath, before casting a sideways glance over at Tubbo, a smirk gently tugging at his lips. "Although, I'm guessing you don't normally spend your Christmases like this either." Tubbo blinked at him for a moment before suddenly letting out a single awkward laugh. "Never," he replied giddily. Yeah, he replied giddily, his voice rattling around his chest shakily. This is definitely a new one for me." "Yeah, I bet," the man replied with a nod. "But don't worry. We're going to get you out of here real soon. You heard it all?" Tubbo shook his head. The man frowned slightly, glancing him up and down with a crease in his brow. "You cold?" Tubbo blinked, the question somewhat confusing him. No," he stuttered, frowning at the unsteadiness of his own voice. Why did his words keep jittering like that? "All right, then," the man said softly, slowly sliding the clip out of his gun again and examining the casings before clicking it back into place. Then he pointed to the back door of the red coupe and instructed, "When I say go, you get in the car, all right?" Tubbo blinked before giving a tight nod. He could do that. "All right," the man breathed, hands curling around the handle of his pistol before he muttered under his breath, "One last time." Then he shot to his feet and shouted, "Now, kid, go!" just as he fired the first bullet. Tubbo leapt into action, lunging for the car door handle. He yanked it open, fingers fumbling slightly over the metal before diving into the car just as the window across from him exploded. He felt glass shards hit the side of his cheek just as he ducked his head. something whizzing dangerously close to his ear before he finally had a sense to cover them with his hands. The sound of gunshots still ringing in the air. Then, the door he'd come in from suddenly snapped shut behind him, and he turned his head to see the pink-haired man swinging into the driver's seat, his gun leveled at the window on the passenger side of the coupe. Tubbo anticipated the shattering of glass before he'd even pulled the trigger, the pain breaking into a million tiny pieces, and his grip tightened over his ears. Then the man's free hand grabbed the stick shift and pulled it toward him, the car suddenly jerking into reverse as he shouted back at Tubbo, "Hang on!" He slammed his foot down on the gas, tearing back the way the car had come, putting distance between them and the men in black suits. And Tubbo immediately let out a yelp, falling out of the car seat and onto the floor before frantically scrambling for the seatbelt and pulling himself back into place. The pink-haired driver swung his gun toward the front windshield, squeezing the trigger at the back. Black-suited men, bullets puncturing holes in the glass, and as he gave them cover fire. Then, just as Tubbo was about to fit the buckle into place, the man yanked down on the steering wheel, sending the vehicle into a 180, and Tubbo found his body slamming against the door he was sitting beside, his fingers pressing up against glass as he attempted to keep his face from getting smashed in. Then, before he could comprehend what the hell had even just happened, head spinning with the force of the maneuver, they were pulling onto the main road and right into oncoming traffic. Tubbo jumped in his seat as headlights raked across the window he was now pressed up against, thinking, for sure this time, that the vehicle was going to slam into him. But instead it merely let out a petulant honk as they sped off, zooming around the other cars as they headed back the way Tubbo had come, towards Spikersuppa. There was a brief moment of silence as they rode down the street. Rode down the street? Whoa, what was that accent? As they rode down the street, other than the road noise and the loud ringing in Tubbo's ears, no doubt from all the gunfire. Then, from the front seat he heard, "Kid, you alright?" And he looked up to see the pink man glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Tubbo merely stared back at him, his mind in tangles, 1,000,001 questions racing through his head. What the fuck had just happened? Had he just been rescued? And why? Who were the people who kidnapped him in the first place? What did they want from him? How had this man known where to find him? Had he been sent by the police? Where were the police? Where were they even going? Was he safe now? But out of all the questions plaguing his spiraling mind, the only one he managed to bring to his lips was, Who the fuck are you? What's that reference of again? I forgot. I remember Danny, you told me something about how like this question was a reference to this. Sorry if I get one more B-Reel notification that someone had posted late. Guys, I made the dance team! Let's go! Guys. I made the dance team. Let's go. We slay. Pog, oh my. Pog, Julie. I just got a document shared with me. I need to switch my account to my Juliberry one. Thank you, Danny. Why does my sister keep replaying my Snapchats? What did I do? Okay. Hearts in chat for everyone. Guys, we made it halfway past the fig. Let's go. There were about 1,001 ways Techno could answer the kid's question. He was a criminal. I'm going to go. I'm having bad internet. No worries, Clover. The VOD will be here when you have good internet. No worries. Hope your Wi-Fi is fixed later. There was about 1,001 ways Techno could answer the kid's question. He was a criminal, an agent for the CIA, a spy, an assassin, an asset, a weapon. But in the end, it always came down to the same answer. It's Blade, he replied after a moment, pulling his eyes back to the road in front of him as he swerved around a white SUV. And put your seatbelt on, alright? I'm not exactly driving safely here. It's Blade. That's a reference to, Tommy asking his name, and he's like, yo, whoa, what's your name? No, your real name. It's Blade. Bozo. What the heck? I broke Spotify. This just in. L. He glanced in the rearview to see the kid quickly scramble for the belt beside him, clasping it into one place with shaky hands. He'd been shivering ever since Techno found him, his whole body trembling with nerves, fingers twitching uncontrollably. He was practically vibrating with how much he was shaking, and at first Techno thought that his body might just be reaching to the cold, or reacting to the cold. I can't read. It just might be reacting to the cold. I'm gonna... Whoa, what'd I do? Oopsie. Reacting to the cold, but now he could tell that it was the adrenaline, non-stop pumping through the boy's veins. Oh my gosh. I'm struggling today, gang. What's happening? Eventually it would wear off, and Techno had a feeling that the kid would probably end up passing out from exhaustion, which was why he needed to get him to a hospital as fast as possible. Not to mention the cuts now littering the right side of his face. How's your cheek? Techno asked gently, glancing back at Tubbo once more before gluing his eyes onto the road ahead of him. None of that glass got in your eyes, did it? There was a beat of silence, and Techno found his eyes traveling back up to the mirror again to see the kid staring at his fingertips, which he'd pulled away from his face, now smeared with his own blood. He looked surprised to see it, which meant the adrenaline was still going strong, the wounds not yet being read by his pain receptors. After another moment of silence, Techno finally said, "It is Tubbo, right?" calling the boy's wide blue eyes to the mirror in front of him. "Listen, I know there's a lot going on, but you still gotta talk to me, alright, okay? I gotta make sure you're okay." The boy blinked at him through the rear view for a few seconds before finally managing to say, "I'm fine," even though his body was still trembling, before asking, "Where are we going?" "I'm taking you to the hospital," Techno said calmly, pulling around a corner as he did. "Don't worry, the police should already be there. Your friend from the ice rink, too." "Rambu?" Tubbo suddenly blurted, leaning forward in his seat. "Is he okay?" Techno couldn't help but look back at the boy, seeing the concern suddenly riddling his face, eyes wide with fear, and he let out a small huff of amusement, remembering the same look of panic in Rambu's eyes when he asked about Tubbo. These two were certainly something else. "Danny said B-Duo rights. B-Duo crumbs." "He's fine, kid," Techno replied. "Just worry about you." But before he could finish, a black car suddenly slammed into the right side of their vehicle, and the red coupe went spinning out. Techno heard himself swear, trying to jerk the wheel back to center, but before he could, his head whipped to the side, his temple striking the window hard. He immediately felt his skin split, red-hot blood starting to streak down the side of his face as the car skidded to a halt in the middle of the road. Techno felt his head spin, his vision going spotty with dots as he tried to steady himself in his seat, before he heard himself murmur, "Fucking hell." As if he was about to die, he hoped that it was a fair enough greeting, because that was all he managed to get out before the wound suddenly went black. The world suddenly went black. Wow. I haven't done this in a while. I'm out of shape, guys. I'm disappointed in myself. The world suddenly went black. My humble B-Duo crumbs. Ave Maria. 2 years earlier. So, yeah. 2 years earlier. What's your favorite holiday? Techno quickly glanced up from the comic book he'd been reading, Spider-Punk #2, stolen off the stack on Tommy's nightstand, to look up at the blonde across from him. Even though it was midday, Tommy was still lying in bed, dark circles beneath his eyes, hands holding the sketchbook he'd been scribbling in just moments before. He'd barely been able to stand that morning, which Kristen said was completely normal after what had happened just a few nights before, But that didn't stop Techno from wanting to keep a close watch over the kid. Tommy seemed to understand this, not even bothering to tease him when he'd pulled up a chair next to his bedside. Maybe he'd even wanted the company. Or maybe that was just Techno's wishful thinking. I don't have one, he finally replied. Tommy frowned suspiciously, nose scrunching up in exaggerated distaste. What about your birthday? He asked. Don't remember it, Techno said flatly, returning his eyes to the page in front of him before thumbing to the next one. Liar, Tommy muttered from his place on the bed, to which the corner of Techno's lips raised slightly in a smirk. If you had to pick then, the boy continued on, shifting slightly as he pushed himself back up onto his pillow, adjusting the sketch pad in his hands. Which holiday would it be? Techno let out a sigh and lowered the comic book, casting the kid a long look as he leaned his elbows onto his knees. He raised an eyebrow at Tommy as if to say, seriously? But Tommy just continued gazing at him expectantly. Christmas, he finally decided. Why? Tommy immediately countered. Techno shrugged haphazardly. Everybody likes Christmas, he said, leaning back in his chair and tossing one leg over the other, leather black shoes shining under the light coming in from Tommy's large set of glass windows. Don't you? Yeah, of course I do. I'm a fucking kid, Tommy replied, to which Techno loud out a... Is that supposed to be loud out or let out? Loud out a snort of laughter. Pip pip cheerio. Then Tommy raised a mischievous eyebrow and added, Why? Are you planning on... Oh. Yes, that is Tommy still. Wow, I'm silly. Why? Are you planning on sending me a card in the mail? Pretty sure that's against protocol, the agent mused. Cheapskate, Tommy said with a smirk. But Techno only smiled. I love them so much. They mean the world to me. They mean everything to me. Present day. Present day. Philza and Kristen had been watching the news for about an hour now, flipping back and forth between stations to try and catch all the updates they could. Phil had called Puffy a few times too, just in case she knew something he didn't, but she hadn't picked up. Which meant she was either ignoring his calls or she was asleep. He knew it was most likely the latter, but that didn't stop him from gripping his cell phone tightly as his eyes remained glued to the TV, waiting for news, good or bad, to come through. He hadn't even touched his wine, too, on the edge to think... he hadn't even touched his wine, too on edge to think about think about much of anything else but the 15-year-old boy, scared and frightened and all alone. He'd get on a plane to Oslo right now if he thought it'd do any good, but he knew it wouldn't. There was nothing he could do anymore. Nothing he could do. Phil? Oh my god, I love this scene. At the sound of the voice, Phil's head was suddenly jerking around to land on Tommy, who had appeared in the hallway, bleary-eyed. He had a frown on his face and was squinting toward the TV as if he was trying to get a read of it. He looked a bit unsteady on his feet, his hand pressed up against one of the pillars that guarded the corridor, and Philza felt himself immediately shooting up out of his seat on the sofa, pulling away from Kristen as he did. Tommy, what's wrong? He asked, the words spilling out of him quickly as he rounded the couch. Are you alright? Tommy's eyebrows knit in confusion, a frown pulling at his lips as he shook his head slightly, ignoring the questions before asking hoarsely, What are you still doing awake? It's like 2 in the morning. Phil blinked, coming into a halt a couple feet away from Tommy before turning to glance back at Kristen. She gave him a little shrug as if to say, just be honest, before he turned back toward his nephew. Tommy was still staring at him, only now the teenager's eyes were searching his gaze suspiciously, as if he could see right through the cracks of his uncle's expression. And Philza immediately felt his exterior harden, body tensing slightly. It's nothing, he murmured with a tiny shrug. We just got caught up in some breaking news and wanted to follow the story. Did we wake you? Tommy's frown deepened, clearly unconvinced by this meager explanation, before he shook his head again. No. Why didn't I become Australian? No, he replied softly. No. No, he replied softly, then turned toward Kristen and said, Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not, Kristen interjected quickly. But you should really get your rest, Tommy. You look beat. Tommy let out a petulant grunt before muttering a sleepy, "All right," and turning on his heel. Philza watched him go, eyes watching his nephew's back cautiously as Tommy began to make his way back toward his room. Sure enough, it only took a couple of steps before the blonde swayed dangerously in place, his hand quickly landing on the wall beside him to steady himself. But Philza was already rushing forward to help, a hand coming to rest on the small of his nephew's back. "You all right there, mate?" he asked softly, tenderness in every syllable. Tommy looked up at him groggily, searching his gaze again before murmuring, "Is everything okay, Phil?" I'm going to sob. Hold on. Oh my god, I'm crying. Phil felt himself freeze up, his lungs tightening around his chest, his heart missing a beat as he stared at his nephew's blue eyes. Even in the dim light, they shone with concern, and Philza felt his eyebrows drawing together, his heart aching. "Of course, Tom," he replied in a whisper. "Why would you ask me something like that?" Tommy still looked unconvinced, but after a moment he just offered up a small shrug. "Just making sure," he murmured. Then he slowly lifted himself off the wall to press his weight into Philza's side, who took it willingly, strong arms keeping Tommy steady on his feet. Then his nephew added, "You're always asking me, so..." He trailed off, his voice growing heavier with sleep by the second. "I figured I'd better ask you, at least this once." Philza's expression softened, gentle hands guiding Tommy back toward his bedroom as he whispered, "I'll be alright, Toms, as long as I got you." Oh my god. Denny's breaking my heart, but in like the best way possible. Oh my god. Okay. Emotion check. How are we? Who's alive? Wait, actually no, I'm not live. I'm dead inside. Oh my goodness. Oh man. Thank you, Minecraft. Very cool. Ugh. Oh, I think I know why. I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi. Dadgummit. That's why my stream deck wasn't working. Is anyone else like really hungry right now? I'm starving Marvin. Bruh. Ugh. Screw this thing. It doesn't work. Techno must have only been out for a few seconds, because when he woke up, he felt like he could go back to sleep for hours. He raised his head groggily, his vision spinning in and out of focus. Everything still black around the edges. Whoa! Casey! I love you too. Thank you so much for the subscribble. 5 months! 5 months, let's go! Thank you. Oh my goodness. Where did I leave off? His vision spinning in and out of focus, everything still black around the edges. He could feel the unconsciousness creeping in again, dark and inviting. But before he could pass out, he forced himself to look in the crooked rearview mirror and catch sight of the car that had hit them. It was the same black Audi that had taken Tubbo from the ice rink. Only now, its entire front bumper was smashed in. I'm on my shift. You know what? Slay. You're doing amazing. The front bumper was smashed in, but that didn't stop 2 men from climbing out of the vehicle. Techno knew he'd managed to down a few of them back in the narrow street, but now he wasn't so sure he'd be able to take them on. His mind felt scrambled, everything swaying and bending around him, but the men were already starting to walk toward their wrecked car, guns in hand. "Kid," the Techno finally managed to croak out, the effort of forcing words onto his tongue making his head throb. hot blood still dripping down the side of his face. "You still with me?" He waited a beat. But when there came no reply, he reached up a hand to the rearview mirror and adjusted it so he could see the kid. Suddenly, his heart came to an icy halt in his chest. Tubbo was slouched forward in his seat, chin to his chest, long chestnut bangs covering his eyes. He was clearly out of it, his body limp and his head lolling forward awkwardly, and before Techno could even bother to think straight, his hands were already flying for the buckle of his seatbelt. "Shit," he murmured under his breath as he fumbled with the lock, finally managing to click it off before grabbing his pistol from the passenger seat. Then he twisted around in his chair to aim through from the rear windshield, squinting his eyes, trying to get a good aim on the approaching figures. But the more he tried to focus, the more he was seeing double, and then triple. Under normal circumstances, he'd probably try his best to get away, regroup, and come back for the men later on. Or he'd wait till they were on their last approach, and then try and shoot them from a shorter distance. The only problem was his mission wasn't to kill these men. It was to protect the kid. He couldn't let them get close enough to take Tubbo away again, or threaten his life. So he had to at least try to take them out. And if he died while trying to save a 15-year-old, well then so be it. He probably wouldn't be remembered as a hero, but at least he tried to be one. He took one last deep breath, bringing his other hand to the gun to steady his aim. Then he narrowed his eyes, pinching one down to line up the barrel of his pistol with the nearest man's heart. "Steady," he thought to himself, his vision still going in and out of focus. "Steady." Then for a split second, he watched as his sight cleared, his split vision becoming one again, and he took his chance. He squeezed down on the trigger, fully expecting the ring of a gunshot, the recoil of the pistol, and the sound of glass cracking as he punctured a hole in the rear windshield. I keep on saying rear view mirror. It's the rear windshield. Instead, the gun clicked uselessly in his hands. He'd run out of bullets. "Oh, you gotta be fucking kidding me," Techno muttered under his breath, just as the men caught sight of him and let out shouts of indignation. Yes, that's a word. Raising their guns toward him, Techno stared at them blankly, realizing that this was it. This was how he was going to die, before casting one last glance over at the kid in the back seat, still passed out, hands lying limply in his lap. Who knew what would happen to him after this? Maybe Techno had stalled the abductor's plan long enough for the police to catch up with them, and the kid would get home safe and sound. Or maybe they'd get away, taking the kid to who knew where to become some sort of prisoner of state, tortured for their amusement and leveraged against his mother. Either way, there was really only one thing left to say. "I'm sorry, kid," he muttered quietly, settling helplessly back into his car seat just as one of the gunmen rounded the right side of the car, approaching the passenger side as he cocked his pistol. Techno watched numbly as the black suit leveled his gun through the window, barrel just inches from his face, before two more words managed to escape from his lips, staining the cold night air with their infinite warmth. "Sorry, Tommy." "Thank you." Then, just as the gunman was about to squeeze the trigger, he heard two clipped shots echo across the street. He stared up at his adversary, still waiting for the final blow, when suddenly a stain of red slowly started to spread across the man's chest. Then Techno watched as his eyes rolled into the back of his head and he fell to the pavement with an unceremonious thud. The other man, still toward the rear of the car, was quick to follow. Techno heard his body drop just as a few more silenced gunshots snapped through the air. His eyes remained on the place where the man had been pointing the gun at him, still seeing the echo of a pistol in his face, like some kind of mirage. He'd been moments from death, seconds even, and he suddenly wondered who the hell had saved them. Fortunately, he didn't have to wonder for long, because suddenly a figure in a brown trench coat was ducking into his line of sight, casually leaning against the passenger's side of the red coupe as he bent down to give Techno a once-over. "You know, when they say I was supposed to meet you in Oslo, this isn't exactly what I had in mind," the man said with a sly smirk, brown curls dancing slightly in the breeze. the rims of his silver spectacles sparkling with golden Christmas lights. His accent was British, probably from somewhere around Cambridge, and for a split second, Techno wondered if he was MI6. But no, he just said he was supposed to meet Techno here, which meant Techno leaned his head back against the car seat's headrest and let out a scoff of disbelief. "You're early, Agent," he said stiffly, although he could feel his body flooding with relief. Agent Soot just shot him a smile in return, shrugging slightly as he replied, "What can I say? Didn't want to be late to meet my new partner." Techno rolled his eyes a little, already starting to pull himself up from his seat and beginning to fumble with the handle of the driver's side door as he asked, "How'd you find me?" "Your dispatch." Soot hesitated over the words as Techno pulled out of his line of sight for a moment, and when Techno finally managed to get the driver's side door open and stand up, the other agent had appeared in front of him, having rounded the hood of the car, and continued, "Your dispatcher said you went dark, so she saw my tag in the area and gave me a call." Techno was only half listening, his head still swimming. He felt like he was 70 feet underwater, his brain about to explode from the pressure. "She sounded pretty worried." "Shouldn't you sit down?" Soot suddenly asked, cutting himself off as his hands began to hover over Techno, the agent leaning heavily against the frame of the car as he tried to blink the dark spots from his vision. He refused to pass out. The kid still needed him. "Listen, an ambulance should be here any minute." "I don't have a minute," Techno growled dismissively, reaching out a hand to gently push the other agent out of the way before making his way toward the door of the back seat. He grabbed the handle and popped it open, pushing it wide so he could kneel down next to the chestnut-haired boy. His hands immediately went to Tubbo's bangs, pushing them out of the way so he could get a glimpse of his eyes, closed, still unconscious, before slowly traveling down to one of his wrists. He pressed his fingers gingerly against skin, measuring his heartbeat for a moment before letting out a tiny sigh of relief. He seemed okay, his chest rising and falling steadily, his pulse strong, and Techno knew the force of the other car ramming into them was probably what ended up knocking him out. Luckily, there didn't seem to be any new injuries on him, but that didn't stop Techno from wanting to get him to a hospital as soon as possible. "There's a kid," Soot stated blankly, just as Techno began reaching around Tubbo's torso to find the clasp of his seatbelt, wanting to get him out of the crumpled car and to somewhere more safe. "Really? I didn't realize," Techno replied sardonically, pressing a finger into the buckle before carefully loosening the seatbelt around Tubbo's shoulders. The tension had... Sorry, I had to cough. Around Tubbo's shoulders. The tension had obviously been the one thing holding him up, because suddenly the boy was slumping. Why did I want to say schlumping? Slumping forward, and Techno quickly reached up to catch his shoulders in his hands, gently pushing him back into the car seat and making sure his head came to rest gingerly against the soft leather. He wasn't sure if the kid had gotten whiplash, but if there was something more serious going on, he didn't want to be the one responsible for hurting him even more than he already was. Soot's voice rose from behind him again, a bit more demanding this time. "Why the hell are you with a kid?" Techno let out a stifled sigh and glanced back at the agent with a mildly annoyed expression. He was still dizzy, and the loss of blood from his temple certainly wasn't helping. They needed to find a hospital, and fast, or both he and the kid were going to end up as dead weight. "Are you gonna keep asking questions, or are you gonna help me out here?" he returned finally. Soot stared at him for a moment, eyes flicking between the boy and the agent. It was obvious that he hadn't been briefed and he had no idea what was going on, but for some reason, when his eyes landed on Tubbo, a look of resolve crossed his face. "What do you need?" he asked. Techno lifted an eyebrow. "You got a car we can borrow?" Tubbo could feel himself being moved, tugged away into the open air, laid to rest on a soft bed of leather, but he felt so far away from it all. He felt like his mind had retreated from whatever pain it was in. The adrenaline that had been coursing through him now faded and aching, and he just wanted to sleep. It felt so inviting, so close, but then he felt a hand on his shoulder, shaking him gently. "Dude, wake up, it's not even lunchtime yet." Tubbo quacked. Tubbo quacked. Tubbo cracked open an eye to see himself sitting at his desk back at his boarding school. The cuff of his uniform creased from where his cheek had been pressed up against it. Of course. He dozed off during geography again, but he couldn't really help it. Late at night was the only time his mother was available to talk to him, and although he always told her he'd already finished his studies, the truth was, the work could always wait till later. Anything to just get one more minute with her. He glanced up to see Rambu leaning over him, sitting on his desk, a bag slung over his shoulder. There was a concerned furrow in his brow, a furrow in his brow, a frown on his face, but Tubbo just let out a yawn and murmured, "Sorry, I'm awake, I swear." "Yeah, you are now," Rambu said, letting out a huff. "You really need to get more rest. I know it's almost winter break, but..." Tubbo waved a dismissive hand in the air. "I'm fine, I'm fine. Besides, I have you to wake me up whenever I doze off again." "Under that logic, maybe I shouldn't wake you," Rambu countered. Rambu countered. I can read, a smug smile falling over his lips. And just let you fail the next geography quiz. Tubbo let out... Oh my god. Tubbo let out a small laugh. "It's my best subject. I couldn't fail even if I tried." Then he sombered a little, trying to flatten out the wrinkle in his cuff as he murmured, "Perks of having a mother who's always traveling, I suppose." Rambu didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at him, before finally standing up with a sigh and saying, "All right, let's go." Tubbo blinked, turning to glance at the clock on the wall. "Go where?" he asked. "Maths in 5 minutes." "No questions," Rambu interjected, holding up a hand to stop Tubbo's words from offering it out to him. "Just trust me." Tubbo stared at his open palm before tracing his eyes back up to his best friend's face. "We're skipping maths, aren't we?" he asked flatly, lifting an eyebrow. "I said no questions," Rambu chided, beckoning for the boy to take his hand. "So are you coming or what?" Tubbo rolled his eyes, but took his friend's hand all the same, the taller of the two helping him out of the chair. Then they were both gathering their things, heading down the hall and out of the school, onto the snowy front sidewalk. They walked for a bit, Tubbo tucking his nose deeper into his scarf, and Rambu stuffing his hands into his pockets as the brisk Norwegian air blew powdered snow off bare tree branches. It was certainly cold enough to wake Tubbo up, and the realization struck him so suddenly that he instantly cast a glance toward his best friend, narrowing his eyes suspiciously. "You did that on purpose," he accused, before grumbling, "It's fucking bitter out here." Rambu let out a small laugh, fingers dancing over the strap of his school bag. "Well, I had to wake you up somehow." Just then, Tubbo watched as a snowball broke over the back of Rambu's black and white hair, knocking him off balance a little as he stumbled forward in surprise, before turning his head to see a group of male students, probably a year or two older than them, laughing hysterically. The one in the middle was already balling up another snowball in his gloved hands, a wicked grin on his face as he shouted toward them. "You like that, freak?" Tubbo's heart dropped at the words, and he suddenly glanced back toward Rambu, who still had his head bent forward, snow dripping off the back strands of his mismatched hair. His bangs were in his eyes, so Tubbo couldn't see his face, but he wasn't moving either, as if his shoes had frozen to the ice beneath his feet. Then, just as the bully started to take aim, Tubbo felt an icy hot, oh my gosh, Todoroki? Oh my god, it's an MHA reference before we were even in the fandom. Oh my gosh. I just want to may I ask what you're reading? Yes, I'm reading Last Christmas. It's a fic that Denny gifted to me. Stop right now. No, I will not stop. Bozo. Hearts. I love you. Oh my gosh, I'm so hungry. What should I eat after I finish? What was it here? Oh yeah, Tubbo felt an icy hot flash of anger course through his bones, bitterness and hatred welling inside him, before he stepped in front of the oncoming snowball, swinging his backpack around and batting it out of the way. It smashed into the ground at his feet, the perfect sphere crumpling against the concrete, before he looked back up at the group of boys, ears burning with heat, and shouted, "Piss off, you fucking assholes!" Assholes? Blah, blah, blah. You arseholes. The boys blinked at him, their faces of joy suddenly filling with a mix of shock and disbelief, before the one who'd been throwing the snowballs took a step forward. "What did you just call me?" he asked, eyes narrowing as he balled his fist threateningly at his... "No, I did not put anything in the oven. I could have sworn I heard something beep. It was just the music." Give myself a heart attack. He balled his fist threateningly at his sides. Tamo grimaced a little at the bully as the bully drew closer, suddenly seeing that the boy was a lot taller than he realized. "Julie, please don't get unalive." Dude, I think I'm delirious. I'm starving. I'm hearing things. I didn't get a lot of sleep. This is how I go. Bye, guys. I'm not there to protect and hold you. Eat food. I will. I just need to make it. I'm almost done. Look at the scroll bar. We're right there. We got like a couple paragraphs left. Tomo grimaced a little as the bully drew closer, suddenly seeing that the boy was a lot taller than he realized. But he still stood his ground, saying, "You heard me. Who the hell just goes around throwing shit at people? That's messed up." The boy suddenly loomed over him, grabbing his backpack and yanking it from Tubbo's grasp before tossing it aside. It landed right in a puddle of icy water, and Tubbo watched as the cloth bag began to soak up the liquid, absently thinking about how all his notes and papers were about to be ruined. "You want to say that to me again, Mama's boy?" the bully snapped, Tubbo's eyes going wide at the nickname before he countered. "Yeah, you heard me. You think you're so special just because your mom is important, but you'll never be worth shit." "Leave him alone." Tubbo suddenly heard Rambu growl from behind him, his voice low and angry. "What's that, freak? Got something to say?" the bully leered, glancing over Tubbo's shoulder. "I said," Rambu repeated, louder this time as he turned on his heel and cast a deadly look at the bully. "Leave him the fuck alone." The bully sniffed, a sick grin spreading over his face. "Oh, really? What are you going to do about it, freak?" But just as the insult left his lips, Rambu swung a right hook at the older boy, landing him square in the jaw. He was immediately knocked to the ground, hand going to his already bruised cheek before tears started welling up in the corners of his eyes. Then, pathetically, he was scrambling away, back toward his friends, until they all disappeared around the corner of the path. Tubbo stood there slightly shocked before glancing over at Rambu. He was panting slightly, hot breath staining the chilly air, his fists still balled at his sides, as if he was still waiting for the bully to strike back. He looked pissed. A look that Tubbo didn't think he'd ever seen on his friend's face before. But despite that, he didn't feel the least bit scared or intimidated. At the end of the day, he was still just Ran. "Damn," he finally breathed, not sure what else to say before adding on, "Nice throw." Rambu glanced back at him with a surprise, as if he'd forgotten that he was there at all, before a smile was suddenly breaking over his face. He let out a nervous huff of laughter and raked a hand through his mismatched hair, pulling fragments of ice from the strands as he did, saying, "Thanks, I didn't mean to hit him that hard." Tubbo let out his own chuckle, a warm spot of sunshine growing in his chest before saying, "Really? Because I thought that was perfect." "Thanks," Rambu murmured again before shooting Tubbo a sympathetic smile. "But I think you better wake up now." Tubbo blinked, confusion hitting him like a splash of cold water to the face. "What?" he asked. Rambu shook his head. "You gotta wake up, Tubbo. I'm waiting for you." Tubbo laughed nervously, thinking that maybe this was some kind of joke. I don't know what you mean, Ran." "Wake up, Tubbo," Rambu repeated again. More gentle. It's more gentle. "Wake up, Tubbo." Rambu repeated again, more gentle this time, his voice suddenly sounding cracked and hoarse. "I'm right here. Just please wake up." And with that, Tubbo was suddenly snapped back into reality, like a rubber band that had been pulled too taut. Blood rushing in his ears as he finally came to. For a split second, there was a groggy sense of peace, of darkness, of nothing. And then the pain hit him like an oncoming train car. He could feel his entire body burning, as if every nerve had been dialed to 11 before bursting like a glass light bulb. He let out a stifled groan, the pain causing tears to bite at the corners of his eyes as he shifted his aching bones to try and get more comfortable. Unfortunately, this just made him feel like he was lying on a bed of glass, and he let out a whine of discomfort, cracking open an eye to see white lights blaring down from above him. Hey, don't move around too much, alright, kid? Oh, that's Techno. Why did I think that was Rambu? Take two. Hey, don't move around too much, alright, kid? He heard her gruff, somewhat familiar voice say, "Trust me, it'll just hurt more." He turned toward the sound, trying his best to squint through the sudden glare of light before catching a glimpse of pink hair. The man looked pretty much the same as Tubble remembered, only his braid had come a bit more undone, and a couple pieces of tape now stretched across a fresh wound over his temple. He looked tired, almost as tired as Tubble felt, but his expression remained calm and somewhat concerned as he leaned forward in his seat. "Blade?" Tubble managed, finally getting a handle on the name before taking in a bit more of his surroundings. Everything was white and clean, and he was laying in a bed with blue sheets, extra blankets piled on top of him. By the door stood another man, one that Tubbo didn't recognize, but who seemed to be keeping guard. Sorry to clear my throat. Trench coat falling down around his knees and tufts of brown hair curling haphazardly over his forehead. As soon as he met Tubbo's gaze, he offered up a gentle smile, but he quickly turned away again, eyes focusing back on the hallway. "Yeah, it's me, kid," Blade replied steadily. "Don't worry. You're safe now, okay?" Tubbo believed him, all the signs indicating that they were, in fact, at a hospital, and even if he didn't, he was too burnt out to put up a fight, his whole body still throbbing with pain. "What's wrong with me?" he murmured. "Nothing's wrong, kid," Blade said, shaking his head a little. "You just had a rough night. The aching is from the adrenaline crash. Your mind just pushed your body a little too far, but you should be back to normal in a few days." "Really?" Tubbo croaked, somewhat skeptical. "Because I feel like I'm dying." This elicited a huff of laughter from his left, and suddenly he turned his head back to the other way to see Rambu beside him, hand holding his on top of the bed sheets. Tubbo hadn't even felt it at first. His body too achy and tingly to feel much of anything. Or maybe he was feeling too much of everything. It's like everything, everywhere, all at once. Ha 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 ha. Reference. But when he saw Rambu's fingers on his, he swore he could feel their warmth, soothing to the touch. Tubbo realized that it had been his voice he'd heard at the end of the memory he recalled while unconscious, telling him to wake up, as he tried his best to give Rambu's fingers a grateful squeeze. Then Tubbo slowly traced his gaze back up to his best friend's face, his eyes gradually adjusting enough to the blinding white lights to make out his features. But when he finally did, what he saw made his blood run cold. Rambu's cheek was completely black and blue, tiny scratches nicking his skin in some areas, his left eye half swollen shut. Despite this, he was smiling, although it was somewhat crooked, as if it hurt to use the bruised side of his face, and Tubbo could see the reminiscent of tear stains on his cheeks. He immediately felt guilt swell up inside of him. If he hadn't been kidnapped, none of this would have happened, and he wouldn't have been lying here unconscious while his best friend cried at his bedside. Hey, take it easy," Rambu suddenly murmured, his other hand suddenly coming to rest on top of both of theirs. And Tubbo realized he'd been squeezing his friend's fingers tighter and tighter as his thoughts spiraled. "Everything's gonna be okay." "But," Tubbo trailed off a little, feeling his throat swell, clogging with the words as he stammered out, Your face." "My face?" Rambu asked with a huff of laughter, eyebrows creasing with half concern and half amusement. "Speak for yourself, Bo." Tubbo blinked before remembering his bleeding right cheek in the car and reaching up to press his fingertips gingerly against a soft cloth bandage. "They're just scratches, but some of them might leave scars," Blade quickly explained, before remembering, "Sorry about that, kid." Tubbo glanced over at him to see a guilty grimace on the man's face, and it suddenly hit him just how much they'd been through. And before he could stop himself, Tubbo was saying, "Are you kidding? You saved my life." Blade's head jerked up to stare at him, blinking for a moment, before finally letting out a tiny sigh. "That may be true, but it was my job to keep you safe, and I failed at that," he said softly, looking up at Tubbo with a fierceness in his gaze as he admitted, "I should have been there to protect you from the start, and I'm sorry I wasn't. This is the last way any kid should be spending Christmas. Tubbo raised an eyebrow at him, finally realizing who Blade really was. It didn't matter who he worked for. MI6, CIA, NIS. He'd been there for Tubbo because it had been an assignment, a mission. And yet he'd still stayed by Tubbo's side until he'd woken up. He'd still helped Rambo after he'd been hurt back at the ice rink. He still cared about them as people, even though his job demanded otherwise. Blade didn't have to stay, and yet he had, and absently, Tubbo wondered why that was. I know why. 'Cause Tommy. For what it's worth, we probably would have gotten just as beat up if we kept on ice skating, Tubbo finally murmured with a sheepish shrug. We're complete shit at it. He's not wrong, Rambo added, squeezing Tubbo's fingers a little, to which the younger boy smiled. Blade let out a huff of laughter, the grim look on his face falling away to be replaced with mild amusement. Well, he started slowly, it probably would have been a lot more fun than the night you got. No way, Tubbo joked, a smirk now pulling at his lips, eyes dancing with mischief. I've always wanted to be in a car crash. Blade shook his head, although a smile still tugged at his lips. Now I know you're just messing with me, he murmured, slowly standing up and now I know you're just messing with me, he murmured, slowly standing up and stuffing his hands into the pockets of his tweed jacket. I'll let you two rest up. If you need anything, the police are right outside. He began walking toward the door, and Tubbo already knew that this would be it. This would be the last time he saw the man's pink braid, or his halfway smile, or the gentle glint of a fondness behind his eyes. This would be the last time he'd be saved by the agent. Even if it wasn't the last time he needed to be saved, but before he let the man out of his sight forever, he knew he had one last thing to say. Blade, he called out softly. The agent paused at the doorway, turning on his heel to face Tubbo, brown eyes falling on him steadily, like he knew him, like he'd always known him. And Tubbo felt all the tension in his chest suddenly release, as if he'd just let go of an invisible breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Thank you, he whispered finally. Blake glanced him up and down, one last time, before finally giving him a nod. And just like that, he walked out of the door, the man in the trench coat already joining him as both of them disappeared around the corner. Oh, fuck, Tubbo suddenly thought. I forgot. But before he could even think of the words, Rambo was already cupping his hands to his mouth and shouting after them, Merry Christmas! Oh, my heart! So wholesome. By the time Techno stepped out of the hospital, it had started to snow again, the flakes coming down in soft drifts of white and landing at his feet. He watched as it began sticking to the cool pavement, filling up the black cracks with tiny specks of white, before taking a deep breath of bitter winter air. He let it fill him up for a moment, just holding it there before letting it out in a puff of hot steam, watching it disappear into the air as quickly as it had come. Then Agent Soot was sidling up beside him, brown trench coat swishing around his knees before casting Techno a sideways glance. Nice of you, what you did in there, he commented softly. Techno let out a sigh. I don't know what you mean, he muttered, before stepping off the sidewalk and heading towards Soot's car across the parking lot, the same silver Volkswagen they'd arrived in. He heard Soot trailing after him, boots hitting the pavement as he jogged to catch up. Staying with those kids, he said, just as he fell into step beside Techno, making sure they were okay. I mean, it breaks protocol, but you did it anyway. And? Techno asked dryly, not bothering to glance over at his new partner. And so? Soot took a breath, narrowing his eyes as he wondered, is this going to be a regular thing with you, or is this like one of those in the spirit of Christmases things? They'd made it across the parking lot now, and Techno came to a halt at Soot's passenger side door. His temple was still throbbing a little, and although it wasn't as bad as before, the agent's incessant questioning was starting to make his head ache again. I guess you'll have to wait to find out, Techno drawled, his eyes following Soot as he made his way over to the other side of the car. The agent stared at him over the roof for a moment, a hint of amusement dancing in his eyes before finally asking, Bangkok? Techno let out a long sigh. Bangkok, he agreed with a nod, popping open the car door. They both slipped inside, Techno letting out a sigh as he rested his head back into the comfortable leather chair, and Soot casted him a sideways glance as he started the engine. That was quite a way to spend Christmas, the agent said, leaning back in his seat as he placed his hands on the steering wheel. You sure you're ready for the new year? Techno let out a short huff of laughter and closed his eyes before finally muttering, just fucking drive. Reports have just come in saying that the son of the UK ambassador is now under the protection of the local authorities. He is reportedly recovering from minor injuries at the local hospital in Oslo and remains in stable condition. And now, back to you. So, he's safe then? Kristen asked out loud as the news reporters rambled on. Philza let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was about 3 a.m. now, way past their bedtime. What do you mean? That's the perfect time to, stay awake. I do it all the time. And he finally grabbed the remote off the coffee table, raising it up to the screen before clicking it off. Kristen had been yawning for about a half an hour now, and he was exhausted himself. At least Tommy wouldn't be the only one sleeping in tomorrow morning. He's safe, Philza murmured, leaning back against the couch and letting out a soft sigh. I'm sorry I kept you up. Not at all, Kristen said abruptly, fingers wandering to his side and picking up his hand in hers. I know you were worried. So was I. If I'm being honest... so was I, if I'm being honest. I just wish we knew more. Me too, Philza whispered before creasing his eyebrows and putting a hand to his chin thoughtfully. Although, I'm sure there will be more information put out in the morning. Probably a statement from the Norwegian embassy. Or perhaps the Phil, Kristen said firmly, already beginning to stand up. Maybe you should just get some rest and worry about it tomorrow, He glanced up at her before shooting her a tired smile. Yeah, you're probably right, he said, allowing her to tug him to his feet, when suddenly his phone vibrated on the couch behind him. He blinked, bending down to grab it before opening the notification. The number was blocked. Unknown, reading across the screen, but Philza had a feeling he knew who the text was from anyways. I'll be right in, he said to Kristen absently, his feet already moving toward the hallway. Don't take too long, she called after him quietly, and he glanced back at her to see a fond smile playing across her lips. He only stood outside Tommy's bedroom door for a moment, taking a tiny breath, before finally turning the handle and ducking inside. He had no intention of waking the boy up, only wishing him one last good night. As he tiptoed over to Tommy's bedside, he could practically hear Techno's voice ringing in his head, reading off the message from the unknown number. Tell the kid Merry Christmas for me. So Phil leaned down, gently placed a kiss on the top of his nephew's golden curls, and whispered, Merry Christmas, Tommy. And that's the fucking end! Oh my god! It's so good. It's so good. Becca! What'd you get here? Welcome to the stream. Clap. Thank you. Sorry for all the little mismatchy. I messed up a bit. You know. It's okay though. That's what editing is for. Danny wrote that for me just a bit ago. I didn't want to try. Oh, stop. I adore you. But yeah, that's the fake Danny wrote for me. I loved every single bit of Angel Duo, Bedrock Bro, Twins Duo, Peer Pressure Duo, B Duo, and then Fireworks Duo, and then Fistin'. We got Fistin', bro. Mwah, mwah. I'm clapping for Danny now. Ah! Not the static electricity. Clapping for Danny. Slay! The best Christmas gift a berry could ask for, in my opinion. But now I'm super hella tired. And I'm starving Marvin. So let's find someone to raid. But yeah, long stream. Am I gonna stream again on Sunday? Heck yeah. Am I gonna find shorter fics to read to you guys? Yeah, I am. Okay. Who's live? Yeah. My god. Let's... You know what? Let's raid GG7. GG7's cool. I met them at TwitchCon. Let's see. He, him. Okay. Slay. Alright. This is my good buddy GG7. We met up at TwitchCon. / raid. He's a cool guy. And he's playing Minecraft. He's decorating his hardcore base. So, that's kind of poggers, not gonna lie. I'm gonna go make myself some food because I don't know if the mic picked it up, but my stomach kept making grumbly noises. I'm gonna go work on My Hero Academia Sona now. It's gonna be wonderful. I'm going to eat right now. I'm literally gonna hop in VC and then make food in VC with you, Sari. It's going to be so much fun. Alright, but we're raiding GG7, so don't forget to use the raid command. I still have to gift Streamlabs a sub, don't I? But yeah, he's Mammut. He's chill. Yeah, so live on Sunday. Saturday, I'm busy. Who knows? But yeah. Alright, gang. Time to leave y'all off with our goodbye, with our exit outro. That's the word. Chat, remember, you're loved, you're worthy, you're beautiful. I love you all very, very, very much. And we'll see you all in the next stream on Sunday. I think it's gonna be a little bit later, so probably like Sunday evening, so CST time. So just keep your notifications on and join my Discord. Please. I'm gonna use the Discord more. I'm gonna host movie nights. It's gonna be great. Alright, but go tell GG7 I said hey. Mwah. Bye, guys! Wow!